The third area of staffing that people spend a lot of time thinking about is attrition. And it makes sense. You spend a lot of time and effort making sure you hired the right people. You then worried about, are they in the right job? How do we promote them? And so on. Well, having got them there, you kind of want them to stay in the job. Certainly, organizations have discovered that turnover is very costly. Why? Because of all the things that it leads to. So what does turnover lead to? It leads to increased hiring costs. Okay, you've got to replace the people. You've then got to train the new people in the kind of skills that the people who left had. And then there's going to be a bunch of things that you can't even train. Some of the unique knowledge that somebody had built up over years, or at least months of working there, which then has to be relearned or maybe is never reacquired. And then on top of that, there are the relationships that they'd built up, both with their colleagues that made the work easier and also with customers. And so we know turnover impacts productivity, it impacts quality, and it impacts customer relationships. And there have been a wide variety of studies that demonstrate strong negative effects of performance on work group performance and profitability. And so this is something you really want to worry about as a manager. Of course, in order for finding out more about it to be valuable, there need to be things that you can actually do with that knowledge. And there are. When you know more about it, you can pull the levers to reduce turnover more effectively. So in particular, when we know who leaves and why, that can inform our hiring decisions. One of the easiest ways to address a turnover problem is by looking at your hiring. Are we bringing in people who are likely to be leaving? At the same time, we could think about what kind of interventions we want to make inside the organization. If certain groups are much more likely to leave, well, are there needs of those that are being unmet? Is there something about the conditions of those jobs, either pay or the work itself, that we can really change in order to address turnover? Sometimes we find there are particular managers who seem to have a problem. Either we can move them out or we can train them and help them think about how to mitigate and reduce that turnover. Okay? And more broadly, to the extent to which we're going to spend time and money on retention, figuring out who our biggest flight risks are will help us in targeting that money and that effort effectively. So I want to spend a couple of minutes just thinking about, why do people leave and how's that going to help us understand the drivers of it? The simplest view of attrition is obviously that people leave their jobs when they find something else that they would rather be doing. That's the kind of depth of insight they pay us the academics the big bucks for. If you think about that, then there are two things that are really going to drive whether or not people stay. Okay? One is the attractiveness of the outside opportunities. And so you will see attrition is highly cyclical. When the economy is doing well and there are more job opportunities outside, people will leave more. It's also going to affect who leaves. Those jobs which are in high demand, where it's easier for people to move to industries that are growing rapidly and have a lot of jobs, those are going to see high attrition. There may also be reasons that people leave because they plan that they want to move on to the next thing. Okay, and so the attractiveness of those things drives it. On the other hand, the fact that something is more attractive than your current job may say something about your current job. And so the less happy you are with your existing job, the more likely you are to move. And so things about kind of either your satisfaction today or your satisfaction with kind of your future trajectory is going to tell you something about who leaves. And so as you think about what it is that makes people leave, what would be some of the things in terms of the current job that you would think would be most important? Any thoughts? Anybody? Anybody? Going to have to start cold calling soon. So what we see here, again, some of the correlations between how people perceive their jobs and turnover. And so what people do in these studies is they go out and they survey people. How do you feel about various aspects of your job? And then they come back 6 months, a year later and say, okay, who left? Kind of the truism here is that people leave managers rather than jobs. And there's some evidence for this. The quality of the relationship that people reported with their supervisor is the highest correlate among these different factors in terms of correlating with turnover. People leave when they dislike their manager, and that we certainly see in the data. If they're not happy with their job, they leave, there's conflict in roles. One of the things that's interesting is that pay is not that strongly correlated with turnover. We kind of think people take jobs and stay in jobs for money. It's certainly true, but it has a surprisingly weak effect in these studies. I'm not sure exactly where that comes from. Certainly, I always say this is a slide not to share with your manager. You always want to think, unless you get a really large raise, you're definitely going to leave. I certainly also think when organizations mess up how they pay people, if people feel under-rewarded, and certainly if they think it's unfair, that's a huge trigger of attrition, but it doesn't seem to be the main driver. The other thing that I would say about these correlations is none of them are super high. Okay, so we see a correlation of 0.25. That's a reasonable size, but it says most people, how satisfied they are with their supervisor, it's not going to tell you a great deal about how they leave. On average, if we don't like our supervisor, we're more likely to leave. There are a lot of people who hate their supervisors who are going to stay. There are a lot of people who really like their supervisors who are going to leave. And so how much we like our job affects turnover, but it's not the only thing. One way to understand that is by thinking about what actually happens when people leave. So another way people have looked at turnover is just the process people take. So if you think about kind of that moment when you walk into your boss's office and say, that's it, I'm done, what leads up to that? So most commonly, it's going to be that you have another job alternative that you prefer. And so you've compared your current job to an alternative and you've decided, I'm going to leave. How would you have got there? Well, sometimes somebody might have called you and just offered you a job and said, either a recruiter or a friend, why don't you come work here? And you look at that and say, wow, that seems really good. Let's do that. More commonly, presumably, you've actually done that because you've been searching for a job. And so somewhere along the line, you've decided to search for a job. Why did you decide to search for a job? Again, there could be multiple reasons for that. So the most common is probably that you don't like your job. But it might also be that you've heard that all of your friends are going and getting great pay raises and great jobs in new firms, and you think, maybe that means I should look around as well. There are other paths as well. So some people may have said, after 3 years, I'm going to graduate school. And so that's not going to have very much to do with how they feel about the job or the alternatives. Of course, some people might just walk into the office and say, I quit without even having thought about an alternative job. Basic point here, so there are lots of different ways this decision is made and different considerations in each of them. And so maybe we shouldn't be that surprised that dissatisfaction with our job and dissatisfaction with our manager drives some of our decisions to quit, but sometimes other things happen in our lives that make us decide to move that has very little to do with it. And so any one explanation of attrition is probably only going to explain what goes on for a fairly small number of people. And so you're going to see there are people who love their job but quit anyway, and there are people who hate their job, but when they go out and compare it with alternatives, they decide there's nothing better that they could do, and they stay. A third way in which people think about this process of leaving is basically in terms of search. And so this very much comes from economics, where people think there are lots of different jobs that we could be doing, and we're going to enjoy those jobs to a different extent based on how well they fit our preferences and also how good we are at them. The catch here is that it's often difficult to know how much we're going to like a job until we've done it. Okay, so we may have some ideas about what we want to do with our lives. I can say for a start, I never expected to be an academic. I always thought I was going to be a manager, consultant, something like that. Then I actually tried those jobs. It's like, wow, this is hard. Maybe just studying other people would be easier. And so we learn over time what it is that we're good at and what it is that we enjoy. And we learn by doing. What that means is that people move across jobs until they find one that they like, and then they stick. And a lot of turnover reflects the search process. The reason that this is useful is it gives us some other insights into who's going to stay and who's going to leave. So in particular, people are more likely to leave early in the job. We move into a job, we decide, is this a good job for me, is it a bad job for me? If it's a good job, we stay. And after a while, we've made that decision. And so we're not going to change our mind. And so people tend to leave fairly early in the jobs when turnover rates are highest. People figure out whether or not it's a good job for us. The other thing that it suggests is that turnover tends to fall as workers get older. Okay? So early on in our career, we don't really have a good idea of what we like, what we're good at. We'll hop around jobs a bit while we figure it out. Later on, we've got more information. We've tried a few things. We're narrowing down what it is that we like and what we don't like. And so the chances that we're going to be in a job that isn't very good for us are lower, and so turnover goes down. Certainly what you see a lot at the moment is managers complaining about millennials. So there's this kind of concern that, oh, these people, they won't stick in the same job, they're endlessly job hopping, what are we going to do about this? This is part of the general trend that old people always complain about young people. This isn't about millennials. Millennials actually don't move jobs much more than people of previous generations did when they were that age. So people in their 20s, they always move. And so as you think about turnover, some of these considerations are ones that want to be in the back of your mind as you think about analysing it.